if you want to settle in the UK and you don't want to apply under the Tier 1 investor route and invest from 2 million upwards, and you don't want to apply for a startup or innovator visa, and if you don't qualify for the sole representative visa because, say, that you have majority shares in your company, then an option to consider is the Tier 2 General High Earner route, which is one way of referring to it. So essentially, if you're paid 160,000 by the UK entity that you establish or that's already in the group, and there's a genuine role there available for you, for example, as chief executive, let's say, or CEO, then you can apply under the high earner route. Now, for this, the key point is you don't have to advertise. So for certain categories, including shortage occupation roles, you don't necessarily have to advertise the position to the resident labour force, because certain roles can be taken up by local workers, and the immigration rules are designed to allow local workers the opportunity to apply for roles. So what I'm going to do here is walk you through exactly what the details involved and exactly how much it costs. Having said this, a quick caveat: these costings, etc., will be dependent on your circumstances, and you'll need to take tax advice and financial advice on it, but primarily tax advice. But I do think it's helpful to give you an overview. So my name's Tom Bradford. I'm a UK-based lawyer. If you are considering applying under any of these routes or looking at Tier 2 at the 160k plus option, I'd be very happy to assist you. So let's have a look at it. I've called it the high earner option. Now, what you would need to do is have a UK entity that registers with HMRC for PAYE purposes, so that's pay as you earn, and corporation tax. You'd need to secure employer's liability insurance, and you'd need to secure a lease of an office for premises in the UK. Now, these are all just basics. If you're not already set up here, if you want a sponsor license, which you will need for this process, then your UK company can't just be in a virtual office. I mean, this is not necessarily a problem by itself, but you can't just have a shell company, if you like, in a virtual office. That's not going to cut it. You need to actually have an infrastructure. So if you don't have any of these things, then you would need to have these in place. You need these as supporting documents in any event if you've got a new entity for the purposes of the application. Obviously, if you're not at the NUCO stage and you've already got a running UK entity, these may not be issues, and these may already be in place. Now, what you would then need to do is apply for the sponsor license for the company. So you'd need to employ basically a compliance officer to be the authorizing officer. So that's the person within the company who actually discharges or who has key responsibility for all of the duties. Under the sponsor license regime, you have basically a delegated. I think the company would have a delegated duties from the government to manage immigration control, and they have a light trigger approach to compliance, quite rightly, because it's such an important role, and you're responsible for, your company is then responsible for bringing workers, and perhaps yourself included, into the country. So as for how this part of it works, once the sponsor license is granted, and that can take up to 8 weeks. In practice, we have secured sponsor licenses within about 2 weeks. Then we'd assign a certificate of sponsorship, and by then we would have prepared the visa application for you in advance, so we can submit it promptly. So all of these work streams need to happen in parallel in order to project manage this effectively. And then the visa application would be under Tier 2 General. So you are then at this stage. So you're paid, I said 160, it's 159,600. And then in terms of the actual tax, etc., on that, your net income under the salary will be approximately, these are only approximate figures, so you must check as the regime and tax levels, etc., do change, and you must take specific tax advice on your circumstances. But approximately thousand. That would be the income. And then as an employee, you would need to, or the company would need to pay approximately 57,000 in income tax and 6 or 7,000 in national insurance. And it would also need to pay about 20,000 in employers' national insurance, but that's tax deductible. So that's a net cost of about 64,000 per year, very roughly. So times 5, because it's a 5-year visa until you get to indefinite leave to remain, that would be about 320,000. Now, if you look at that 320,000 as a figure in terms of cost, well, if you invest 2 million under the tier 1 investor route, of course that capital is tied up until the end of the period, but you do get it all back. But that is like a loss, if you like. But having said that, the tier 1 entrepreneur route is now gone, which required you to invest 200,000, which was an investment that was at risk. So if you're sort of comfortable with that as a cost or as an overhead of the process, then 320,000 might be acceptable. I think this is only really if you've ruled out sole representative, startup visa and innovator visa. If you do want to speak with me about your options, feel free to get in touch. My email address is below, together with details of how to contact me on WhatsApp or on WeChat. So as for the application and preparation, let's look at the detail of that. What we would do, what I would do on your behalf, is carry out the sponsor license compliance training and put in place a sponsor license policy for the UK company, or help you to formulate that policy in a compliant way, then apply for a sponsor license for the UK company, and then you'd be granted the sponsor license. As I say, there's a potential 8-week lead-in time, but it often takes just 2 weeks. The key thing on compliance is you've got to be compliant. The policy isn't going to do everything for you. It will simply reflect the processes that you would have had to have put in place. The authorizing officer is the most senior person in charge of international recruitment, so it's the authorizing officer that I would have to train unless they're already experienced. And ideally there'd be someone already within the company who's already in charge of international recruitment. If someone's being brought in afresh, it's possible to do that and have them appointed for these purposes and to assist with international recruitment, but they would need to be trained if they weren't familiar with the regime. So that's what we do there. Next, we've got the interview. So normally an application for a sponsor license would trigger an interview. Interestingly, clients haven't been interviewed recently. Our applications seem to have been granted recently without an interview, but you do need to be ready for an interview, and the Home Office really like hard copy records rather than electronic records. So I have had clients who have had bad experiences really with electronic systems for HR systems for managing employees, and it's just complicated to access information, or you might not have all information in one place. So the Home Office just prefer you to have a file on each individual and a separate compliance file for sponsor license matters, and that's what I tend to set up. Really old-fashioned, if you like, folder, not digitalized, just with everything printed out. That's what the Home Office tends to like. So that's that. Then so after that, you'd be appointed as a level 1 user on the sponsor license, so sponsor management system. So that's just the software interface that's used to deal with work visas. Typically, I would also be a level 1 user, and you would be the key contact. These are all official roles within the sponsor license. I'd assist to assign a certificate of sponsorship, and then prepare the visa application supporting documents and arrange the visa appointment. So again, all of that done in parallel to just move things along quickly. Then you would apply from outside of the UK and provide instructions. We'd provide instructions for you to re-enter the UK and collect your biometric residence permit, which you have to do promptly. And I say re-enter the UK. That's if you're actually in the UK now. You may be abroad now. And then fees. So I want to break down the charges in terms of the government's fees. So the Home Office fees are, at the time of speaking, and again, all of this must be independently checked in terms of the applicable rules at the time you're applying and against your personal circumstances. But very broadly, it would be about 1,820 for the skills charge. That's 364 times 5 if it's a small organisation for a 5-year period, and that's got to be payable by the UK company. And then 1,000 for the immigration health surcharge, so that's 200 per year times 5 for a 5-year visa. That's just for you. And then the main visa fee for you for Tier 2 General would be 610. Then the visa application processing time for a priority service, you pay for that, would be 5 working days. And then you'd have there's additional services which you can order from VFS. So they could include the service for keeping your passport. So, they don't hang on to your passport. That's 125. Priority, these are purely examples. So these depend on your particular application centre. Priority visa service, 384. Walk-in without an appointment, that's very handy, 70. And then premium lounge, 75. And then as for so I hope that helps in terms of explaining the overall fees. The visa extension, settlement and citizenship. So it allows you to apply after 5 years for indefinite leave to remain, and then 1 year after that you can apply to become a British citizen. So in overview, this is because your options really in the UK are quite limited, or can be quite limited. You've got Tier 1 investor, startup, innovator visa, sole representative, and then your only other option really if you want to settle in the UK is this one, applying under Tier 2 General. And it may be that you already have a sponsor license in the UK, but obviously I've explained this in this session, what you would do in order to set up the company in the UK as part of the group, what compliance infrastructure you'd need on top of any infrastructure you already have, in order that the company is eligible to apply for a sponsor license. If it's not, then you wouldn't be able to apply. But assuming you could apply, then you can bring people in, and it's possible then to bring you in, or key players within the company, on a high earner visa route if they don't already have a shortage occupation role, let's say, or if to come in would involve an advertising process, then that may not be the most appropriate way of dealing with it. If, for example, you're bringing over very senior executives, where you have them specifically in mind, and they're going to be the key players, you wouldn't necessarily want to be advertising the roles for your most senior shareholders and employees. So that's where this route can come in useful. I'd say it's a pretty narrow route. Most of the applications that I'm running at the moment are for sole representative, innovator, and startup. And of course, there may be other options for you if you have a British family member or a European family member. In any case, feel free to get in touch with me if you're looking at your options for reaching abroad, and in particular for coming to the UK. I'd be delighted to help you. You can email me or drop me a WhatsApp or message me on WeChat on the details below. Thanks, and see you in the next live stream.